I'm Mark Seifter.
And I'm Linda Zayas-Palmer.
And this is Arcane Mark. Welcome, everyone, to our next exciting episode of Arcane Mark. Arcane Mark asks James Case, our first editor on the show. Welcome, James.
Hey, everybody.
So we're getting started now. I know a lot of people may still be watching Glass Cannon, but who knows? Hundreds of people may appear here at any time, and suddenly the chat could be full of whatever it's full of. But we'll get started as normal anyway. So James, the first thing we usually ask guests on the show is, how did you get started with Pathfinder, like playing Pathfinder as a game?
I was one of those people who first got into Tabletops 335. And so then Pathfinder came out, and I was one of those people who wanted to keep going with that sort of thing instead of making the jump into 4E. So I remember when I started at Paizo, I was trying to get a staff account set up, and the only thing that it was in my entire staff account was like the alpha or the beta playtest for the first one. I had nothing after that. And I was like, oh, that is where I lived. The address I had in on Paizo, I was like, that is where I lived like 15-ish years ago.
So you did all of the beta playtest, and then
I played Pathfinder a bunch. Yeah. All right.
Very cool. And I'm sure that playtest experience was helpful in editing the new playtest.
Yeah, I'm actually not sure I ever played through any of the playtests. I remember just picking up the PDF and like flipping through it frantically to see what was in it. But yeah, I really liked it.
All right. Sometimes frantic flipping can lead to joy.
I'm sure you're familiar with the whole just like, I'm gonna look through this. I'm like, oh yeah.
Yeah. So the second question we usually ask every guest is, how did you come to be working at Paizo? What was the path you took?
I first started editing. I was living in Japan about 2 years ago. And so for about 4 years there, I was editing biomedical research papers, that sort of thing. So, nursing, surgery, a bunch of stuff like that. I eventually quit. I figured I wanted to try and get into games. And I was just like, what are the games that I like? I will go look through all their websites. And I thought, oh, Paizo is hiring an editor. And I was like, I know Pathfinder really well. And I figure if I can edit surgical reports for people in a foreign language, I can probably do dragons and, golems and stuff. So I applied. I moved back stateside, and then I've pretty much been here ever since.
All right.
So how do you go about editing something that is not only in another language, but also so very technical, is filled with... I'm sure you ran into all the time terms that you weren't familiar with. So how do you go about that?
Does being technical actually help when it's in another language?
So I was editing in English, but it was because scientific publication, everything, is published in English for the global community. And Japan does a lot of research, obviously. So, but then everybody is writing in their second language. So I was doing I was checking in English, and sometimes we had translations from Japanese into English. And in that sense, there are a lot of, when we speak to each other as native speakers, we're never grammatically correct any of the time, but we're all native speakers, so we can all kind of, just get through it by instinct. Whereas if you're trying to communicate from, say, a Japanese speaker writes this paper, and then it gets read by somebody in India or somebody in France, or somebody who doesn't, for whom English is not their first language either, it means that you have to be like really super precise and clear, and that's actually been very useful working, in games, that sort of thing, because as you know, we have a bunch of rules, we have terms. Sometimes you have words that mean a different thing in a game slightly than they might mean outside of the game. So it was a pretty good grounding, I would say. Sure that the image that the designers and the developers and everybody have in their head is the same image that the people who are reading it get in their head when they read it. That's really all I do. And I also correct spelling errors, but that's neither here nor there.
All right.
So did you often see then that you would see turns of phrase that you would think like, this doesn't make sense in English, but I recognize this is a parallel to a Japanese colloquialism?
All the time, constantly. One of my favorite is many studies English, we always say many studies.
Mm-hmm.
If you put in the word like kenkyu into the dictionary, it gives you the word research. So I would say 9 out of 10 papers that I reviewed began with something saying like many researches have studied the effect of this medicine on the heart, and I'm just like, that's not researches, that's studies, and the spell checker is not picking it up because researches is a valid word. That's there's a whole I could give you. The rest of this stream could just be me detailing mistaken turns of phrase, but I don't think that that's what people are here for. So, but there are many of them, yeah.
I don't know. I think that's pretty entertaining.
Okay, let us continue.
All
the
right.
word concrete is the first word that comes up when you say gutaiteki, so instead of specific. So people are always talking about concrete solutions all the time. I had a paper once on the structural integrity of cement, and they kept talking about how they had to find concrete solutions to make the cement stronger. And I was like, this is just coming off as a dad pun. Like, this needs to not be this way.
Yeah, it just seems like a pun.
Yeah, there are a number of, there's a lot of them in any event, which makes sense because, everybody kind of goes through the same grounding. Everybody takes the same kind of language curriculum in middle school, elementary school. So it makes sense that, everybody kind of has some of the same parallels.
Yeah. What is the weirdest thing that you've seen written that you realized, oh, that's what it is, rather than just like complete gibberish?
Oh, there's a lot of really good unfortunate typos we see. Medically, spaceman. All the time they talked about going into, say, the tumor site and taking out a spaceman and then freezing the spaceman and then mounting the spaceman, on a slide and then viewing it with a certain level of magnification. And I was like, oh God, that poor spaceman. It is, of course, just the word specimen that got auto-corrected to something slightly different, but I did start to feel a lot of empathy for the poor spaceman.
I have to admit, I was fishing for spaceman there.
That's a good one.
Yep. What about in RPG writing?
In RPG writing, is there something I have seen lately? I don't know. There's a lot of them. Nothing is immediately coming to mind right now.
All right.
I know Owen tends to do a good job of documenting his unfortunate typos he tends to see. So that's always a good one. But if you ever hear just like random uncontrollable laughter coming from the editor cube, first it comes from one person because they discover it, and then we inevitably post it into our department chat, and then all the rest of the editors start laughing. That means we found something unintentional.
Aha. Well, so which one do you think was more technically challenging? Second language, medical editing, or game rules? Or are they just so different that it's too hard to rate?
They're pretty different. I would say, though, that I say that there's more different kinds of things we have in our book versus what I did in medical. Like, if you've done one nursing report on something, it's very similar to like a lot of other nursing reports, and the whole, a whole paper is about 4 sections, like an introduction, methods, or results, and a discussion. And maybe the methods is a little different, but otherwise it's all written in the same style. Whereas our products are functionally a bunch of story stuff, and then a bunch of technical writing, and then a bunch of stuff that's kind of in between them, and they all come in any sort of order throughout the paper. So having to full-on change writing styles halfway through a composition is something I've only done in gaming.
All right.
So we have our first question from the chat. Do you work more on one line of products than the others?
What are you the specialist in among the editors?
Pathfinder. I missed the release of Starfinder. I had a couple of years where I sort of wasn't following Paizo as much, and then when I applied to the job, I was like, when did they do another game? I haven't even seen this. So I'm just a little further behind in that one. So Pathfinder 1, when we were still publishing it, and I was one of the first editors to kind of get really hard into the playtest rules and then into the P2 rules. So I do most of the Pathfinder stuff.
All right, so you're one of the Pathfinder 2nd edition experts.
Yeah, as well as also any of the like supplementary stuff, like the blogs or pre-gens. That tends to be stuff I take.
All right.
But, yeah.
There you go.
So the pre-gen certainly being relevant to the
yeah,
to the folks
we're a
who play
week out
Artist
from
Play.
yeah, we're a week out from Gen Con now, so
A lot of people are about to see those. I remember you during the playtest at what was it? Wasn't it a PaizoCon where you had like a little mini fine tip Sharpie and you were correcting the pre-gens like right on the spot?
it was relevant because it did say that Magic Missile was a cantrip in the pre-gen. So that just seems like a thing we should get on top of.
I think a lot of us were fixing the pre-gens with a Sharpie at the playtest.
Yeah.
There were a lot of
the playtest was a very chaotic time in our lives.
That's true. It was. How would you compare the experience of editing for the playtest to the experience of editing for the final game?
Oh, I love editing for the final game. I know what the game is like when going into it, so that's really good. For the playtest, we were seeing it for the first time as well. So we would see an explanation of a mechanic, and it's like, this is a press. And we thought, what is a press? Is a press a thing that's going to come up a lot? Is a press unique to this class? Is a press unique to just this one ability? We had no idea. And, then we looked through the places the whole time. We got a little more, so we were going into the core book with the real knowledge of kind of the direction things were intending to head. And we also know that we're kind of playing for keeps now. With the playtest, we thought, oh, well, if we don't like how we're phrasing this, or if we find out that it's confusing, we can just change it next year. And now we're like, okay, this is the real thing. We got to start figuring out how our style is going to be, and all that kind of stuff.
That makes sense. So several people at once are super interested in which ongoing games you're in right now.
Right now, I am only playing a P1 campaign in office after hours that Luis Loza is GMing. We are playing through Return of the Runelords, which is fun, and I'm hoping to get a P2 group together because after working on those books, I kind of want to play them. They seem really fun. I'm really into them. So right now, it is only the P1 game.
Well,
James, tell me about your character.
My character is a Tengu, and the extent of my backstory is blacksmith has shadow powers because, I don't know, somebody left an egg too close to the shadow plane or something. Is the full extent of what it is. I'm playing a Gloomblade, which means that I am just constantly pulling shadow swords out of the shadow plane. I think that they are the shadows of things that I have crafted, and then when I craft like a sword and he like gives the sword to somebody, he like keeps its shadow, and that's what he's using. Luis also killed me in session maybe 1 or 2, so there are constant times when he kind of just hand-waved it by saying, there's a lot of time stuff that happens in there, so I think I kind of came out of an alternate timeline or warmed into this one or something like that. So I do sometimes have memories of things that didn't happen, and I do low-level bicker with Eleanor's character, who is a catfolk paladin. So it is just bird and cat a lot of time.
Very catty bickering.
That sounds awesome.
There's a lot of it, yes.
All right.
And we try to avoid Ron Lundine's character, Rod of Wondering us. Poorly.
Oh, is he like a sort of playful character in that game too?
Who? Ron Lundine?
Ron Lundine?
A prankster character?
Who would have ever guessed?
I know, right?
Speaking of Ron's random prankstery gnome characters, there is that office game of Shattered Star, if I'm ever not, like, in a place where everything is behind.
We're back into the playtest.
It was in the playtest, but you guys are in part 4, and all editors and developers are, who were not in another playtest game are invited to Shattered Star Part 4, when I actually can start again. So, we'll see when that is. I think that's going to be
after... Not for a couple weeks, at least.
That's going to be after Game Mastery Guide, and then after Game Mastery Guide is going to be the thing that's after Game Mastery Guide, and after that is the thing that's after that. So
wow, sequential ordering.
Yeah, I know, but we haven't announced any of those things until Gen Con, so...
Well, everybody will find out next week, so...
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
Are you going to be at Gen Con, James?
Oh yeah, I need to be there. I need to see it with my own 2 eyes.
Have you ever been to Gen Con before?
Last year was my first Gen Con.
Okay, yeah, I thought you were there last year.
Yeah.
That's
I
why...
was there. We were standing next to each other at the playtest
Yeah.
pile, but it was a very hectic
But
time.
it's possible I was hallucinating, but you were like, you needed to see it with your own eyes. I was like, wasn't he there?
I had no real... That was the first time I had been to Gen Con, and I
Okay.
had no real sense of the scope of it. I just knew that people were like, it's big, or a lot of people come in, and I didn't really have a sense of that until the doors were open and I saw Lisa being like, here they come! So...
There's something really adrenaline pumping about that moment where you're standing on the other side of those triple banked double doors.
Oh yeah.
Hearing the people gather outside, particularly the years when they had them. They didn't do this last year, but every other year, them having everyone chant like "Walk, don't run, walk, don't run," and it's like the horde of orcs that's like amassed outside of.
My go-to point for anytime a large crowd is about to descend on something is what they say is the line uttered before the final battle in the mediocre live-action remake of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which is just, "They come, Your Highness, with numbers and weapons far greater than our own." And that is how I felt at Gen Con last year, and that's certainly how I feel this year, I'm sure.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think
I'm looking forward to it. We, for us, that whole book was kind of sealed, back in whenever it was, but several months ago, and now I get to be excited about it all over again. So that's nice.
I mean, that was totally a leading question. I know you're going to Gen Con. We're on a panel together, but
yeah, that would be bad if he wasn't.
Oh, I'd forgotten that.
It's like psh, ninja smoke bomb.
Yeah, we're going to be on a panel together about diversity in gaming.
Yeah.
That's gonna
which
be
is
fun.
a lot of what we do in editing, actually. So that'll be nice.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I know we're going to be on a whole Gen Con panel about that, but not everybody here is going to be at that panel. So do you have any insights to share as an editor?
Yeah, what are your top tips?
Top tips for diversity.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and I would say that this is a little more of a problem with Pathfinder than Starfinder, just because of how the sort of arc of fantasy has been versus sci-fi, but a lot of really established tropes are kind of in need of a little bit of updating. And even when people mean very well, they can kind of sneak in there. And so just when you read, keeping like a really open mind for, is this coming from a place where, even if it's not intended to be denigrating towards like a specific group of people or anything, if the root of the phrase is kind of there, we should probably just find it. English has something like 3 times the lexicon of most other languages because we kept stealing words from France and Germany, among other things. So we can just find other words. Liz had a really good one today where she just said that the word no nonsense seems pretty innocent, but it's applied to women like 90% of the time. And it kind of has the implication that, like, if you don't say a woman is no nonsense, the implication is that women are nonsense by default, which is not the best thing to be saying in your books. So I think we just changed it to, it's like the captain of the guard or something. We said she's very like serious, or she's very like, direct, or something like that.
So you don't. So it's not good to say that the women are no nonsense and also fiery and feisty and exotic and all those other buzzwords that are like favorite.
Or like,
oh my god,
hysterical is my favorite. That's one that comes up every now and then.
I can't believe that makes it through to you.
Yeah, but
yeah.
There's a lot of stuff of that. Looking at the gender balance, obviously stuff about race has come up a lot. A lot of times, certain fantasy, races. I mean, the word that we use for them for most of gaming and stuff, it was the word race, and so we're just trying to kind of get a little bit away from that. And one thing that I really like, because also just from like, I think it leads to better writing, is making sure that like your villains are evil because they do evil things, not because they, have like a limp or something. That's a thing that comes up a lot in writing for a long time. So I just think your villains are more interesting villains if they're evil because they do evil things.
Yeah, we actually talked about being evil for being evil, not having a limp, actually just last time, which is cool.
Oh,
And
nice.
another thing
Yeah.
I've seen you guys do on gender balance, which I think is great, is I think in Doomsday Dawn, I was reading through it before you guys got to it, and I had an issue where it was exactly even between male and female characters, but all of the good guys who were helping you were women, and all of the villains were men. And when it came back from edit, you guys had already fixed that by switching some of them around.
The
So
a somewhat related thing is even if you have a good balance of of speaking characters, like NPCs who are important to the story, and they're kind of like a pretty equal mix of genders, you can also have a thing where all of the male characters are like professors or warlords or like famous magicians or something, and all of the female characters are like servants. That's a thing that comes back. So sometimes what we do is we're just like, even if the number is 50-50 or as close to it as we can hope to get, the portrayal is kind of weighted. And so that's another instance where you might look, okay, how easily might we be able to just kind of spin this around or rearrange it a little bit?
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's
And
a nuanced discussion going on about no nonsense and how it's interesting that when it's applied to an occupation or a
Yeah,
descriptor, that they people are saying it's very gender balanced. But if you ever say might say no nonsense woman without anything else, but you wouldn't really say no nonsense man without anything else, and that's where
yeah,
it
and I
gets
mean,
into a problem.
and
That's
that's
part of the
language context is everything, right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
and I think that's actually almost the fact that you would say woman versus that you gave example of guard captain or other things like that is a sign of deeper sexism. That it's like, well, if it's a man, you have to specify guard captain or doctor or some other profession, but for a woman, you can just say woman and have it work. Like
It's
that's maybe a problem that is even worse than the no nonsense problem that
it's
is causing
interesting
the no nonsense problem.
because like if you flip the gender and something sounds weird, then that's really a good sign that you should take a closer look at whatever you're
yeah,
looking at.
and we don't necessarily look at everything and kind of reflexively change it. We're always trying to see how it fits in, or if there's any other considerations about that character that might mean we have to take a bit of a more nuanced look. But yeah, just as something that sort of came up today in that general vein.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah.
All right, so let's see. On the also on the vein of Return of the Rune Lords and the seven sins of Thassalon, James, you've once said to me, I think that like one of your superpowers is actually related to the sin of sloth. Can you specify that a little bit more? Maybe to the virtue of efficiency that
The
is the
virtue
other
of
side.
sloth.
Yeah, the
I do
virtue.
I do often say that my best work quality is that I am extremely lazy. And I think especially in the we make books in a time when a lot of games are no longer books. And so I think there's a little bit of we want to kind of be traditional in a lot of the ways that we make our products, but at the same time we have a lot of work to do, and I wouldn't go through and spell check every word, by looking it up in a paper dictionary and making sure it was correct. And in the same vein, I think that there's a lot. One of the things I push for in editing is to use a lot of tools that can kind of help us keep track of common repeatable errors. I just have like a macro that changes Galarian to Galarion. That's a good common one. I have something that italicizes a bunch of spells. But yeah, I'm a big fan of looking for ways to simplify our process as much as possible because we publish a lot of words, and I would rather be looking through the story at a kind of a higher level than just making sure everything is spelled correctly.
That
I
makes
mean,
sense.
Hmm.
yeah.
And Nitro says, I think it's cool that you look through the gender balance as a part of the editing pass. So what sorts of things what goes into doing an editing pass on a project? Because we haven't had an editor on here before.
That's
and
right.
I hear people
Well, let me
who
tell you
don't
about the
have
world of editing.
Yes, I
Yes,
forgot about
please.
that. So explain your job.
So at Paizo, we have editing happens at two places. We have editing that happens before layout because all things considered, it is infinitely easier to edit in a Word document than it is to edit in like a final laid out InDesign in-copy file where you have so much more stuff to keep track of. So usually a product will come to us and it gets broken up into a pagination. So that just shows kind of every page in the book and broken out by sections. So you might say, if something like the core rulebook, we had, you know, the introduction and then ancestries and then classes and that sort of thing. And we try to get 2 full passes of everything in before. And what that means is that every page is looked at by 2 editors. We don't always get there, but what that means is that every editor will look at kind of we'll try to look throughout the book once. Usually somebody doesn't ever read the whole book through all the way, but we try to keep it constrained to sections. For instance, in like an adventure path, if somebody edits the first chapter of an adventure, we hope that they can also edit the second and third chapter and also the NPCs. Those are all very tightly linked. But also in adventure path, a lot of the times we have back matter articles that touch on themes in the adventure, but are not necessarily like really super tightly canonically linked there. And then that's something where, you know, we can split it up a bit. At that point, we're mostly editing for that's the first time anybody looks at it, so that's a lot of times when the heaviest lifting happens. That's when we fix a lot of the styles, writing, ways we talk about things, making sure the rules are as clear as possible. And then it goes off to layout. Art spends a bunch of time laying it out. It comes back, and some of the text is new because, as everybody might be familiar, layout is an art. It's more an art than a science. We can get some really cool art that came back in. I remember that, but that can totally change the amount of text that you need to have on a page. I remember one of the monsters that I think is really cool, but that I have kind of a unfair hatred for in the upcoming bestiary is the Grave Knight, because the Grave Knight is a really cool high-level monster with a ton of abilities, and we got awesome art in for it, but that awesome art contains this giant banner with these like majestic trailing tendrils that look super cool, but also like came out onto the page, and we had to like copy fit around it, make sure that the words were not.
Oh, and the Sahuagin spear.
Yeah, spear was good. There is an angel with giant, awesome wings, and her wings definitely just go across the entire width of the page.
That's been true since PF1 on the Archons and Angels.
The
oh my
wings.
gosh, the wings.
Angels, your wings are too majestic.
Stop.
Gotta just tone it down. Yeah, I gotta tone it down. And so then what we're looking at that point is not just making sure that after all of the little changes to text, a lot of times some material will get cut, sometimes more material will need to get added. But then what we're looking at is not just does the text look good and is it in the right styles and is it clear, but it's also like how does it flow across the page. We try to have the columns always fill the bottom. It just kind of like looks nice. It makes it look like there's a lot of material on the page, but that can mean sometimes that a line that says he throws a fireball at you turns he throws a large scorching burning fireball, and we're just that maybe meant that we were trying to just get one more line in there. Usually we can try to do it in ways that lead to the text being good, but there is a lot of kind of really minute adjustment at that stage.
And for anybody who's really interested in the order of which steps happen, go back to early Arcane Mark episode, one of the first ones where we talk about all the steps of the project from the brainstorm at the very beginning all the way into getting it up on Paizo.com. And that'll show you. You'll see edit before layout and layout and edit after layout. But James here is giving a lot of details about what happens in that phase that I think we've never heard before on the show. So hopefully you guys find that really interesting. So here's a loaded question that you can easily answer about the task of being an editor, James. So I've often gone onto Paizo.com and seen something where it was like, wow, this feat is really overpowered. Nice editing, Paizo. Is it part of your job as the editor to figure out if feats are really overpowered?
It's not my job. It is occasionally my responsibility. And what I mean by that is, we're not the people who make the final call on how much damage, a laser does. But there are things that a lot of editing is catching things that fall through the cracks higher up in the flow, because there's a gajillion little bits that go into making one of these books, and it's really easy to just look away at the wrong second, and just something that you meant to be there, you thought you put it in and it didn't get there, it falls through. And since we're familiar with the game, we can catch the egregious ones. And I think a lot of times, half of my messages to Mark in the office are basically just disambiguating. Did you mean this, or is this intentional? There is an upcoming monster. It is high level. It has a beam. The beam does 20d6 force damage. And I looked at it, and that's it. It just says it does 20d6 force damage. And I looked at it and I said, that seems like that's a basic reflex. It seems like you should be able to reflex that for half damage or something like that. So, and then the answer was yeah, and I think it maybe just didn't make the jump over in the layout process, and I added that back in.
So those are the 20d6.
Yeah, ooh, I would run that monster, but I think that's probably not intended. So we don't make final design decisions, but we do know how the game is put together, and we do know what the words on the page mean. Even if you look at an ability and you say it's clear that this is probably what the designer intended, a lot of times what we do is we look at it and we're just like, I'm gonna make sure that this is what it says before I put that to print and it shows up, and then people don't have a good time about it playing it. Because if you're playing like a video game or something and you don't know if you can do thing or not, say you're playing a game, you don't know if you can dual wield swords. If you go to the swords and you press the A button and you try to pick it up, one of three things will happen. You will either be able to do it, you will not be able to do it, or the game won't know and it'll blue screen you. And that's kind of what happens at the table, except that the computer is like a human brain trying to figure it out. And I think that the version of blue screening is when it devolves into a rules quibble, and then people are trying to argue with each other, and then people completely leave the table and they start looking for errata or disambiguation or like a rules ruling on the forums, and we don't want that to happen. That's time that people could be spending killing zombies or whatever. So we try to cut that down as much as possible. Yeah.
So I believe Mark asked that question in part so that we could say that like there's a lot of things that get blamed on editors that like.
Yeah, I was actually trying to make it so that we would say that don't blame editors at all if that problem is in there. But you gave an answer that sort of is telling people maybe to blame you a little, but they should still mostly blame the designers and developers.
I liken editing to like camera control in a video game, in that I think if we do I used to be a stagehand in high school, and about a month ago I was like, oh god, I'm still a stagehand. How did that happen? Because a lot of what we do is kind of running around behind the scenes, and I think you only really notice us if like something really egregious happens. So that might be part of it for sure.
All right.
But sometimes things just slip through. I know there was the pre-gens for Gen Con all have their backgrounds on them.
Pretty kitty.
Prettiest kitty. Drugami's background is prettiest kitty. And what happened there is, I think John Compton wrote Drugami's background. Like, Drugami is Animal Companion. Drugami doesn't have a background, but we have a slot in the thing, so he just wrote prettiest kitty. Mike Sayer saw it and he said, weird, but cool, why not? So, prettiest kitty. I looked at it and said, why not? Prettiest kitty. Adrian saw it. Yeah, sure, that's fine. It went back to John. He's like, who put in prettiest kitty, and how did it make it this far in the process?
That would be you. Look in the mirror, John.
That reminds me in Starfinder, like early on with the very first magic items, Logan just inserted Jingasa of the Fortunate Space Marine into there, and it said it gave plus 20 AC and let you re-roll everything and like 5 other ridiculous things just to see what happened, and indeed it was found like immediately. But
I see a question in chat, something about like a monster with 77 perception. I don't know about that, but I definitely...
Oh, it was a monitor lizard.
Okay. Is it? Oh, I remember that. I think we might have caught it in proofs.
Yeah, we did. We caught it in proofs. It was changed in proofs. Jason told everybody about it.
Hey man, lizards are really perceptive. They see everything. Their tongue can detect infrared heat and stuff.
And it's a monitor lizard. The word monitor means it should be able to see things.
It's vigilant.
Yeah. So here's some other questions for you from chat. What is your favorite leisure activity that isn't tabletop RPGs?
I blow enormous soap bubbles. I was the second most famous soap bubble blower in Tokyo, and I think here I still go to the park a lot. I find it really meditative. I like the super long poles. I make all my own mixes, and I just kind of go to the park and chill out for an hour, listen to some music. That's another thing. I'm still really into Japanese music, so I also run a site where I like translate music and review and stuff. So I think those are my two things. I think those and Paizo take up most of the sphere.
Would you say that you're the number one most famous bubble blower in the greater Seattle area?
No, actually, I found some. In Instagram drifted across my thing the other day. They had very good bubbles. I should ask them about their
Okay.
formulas and stuff. Yes.
Oh, fair enough. Fair enough.
How big can soap bubbles get?
How big can soap bubbles get? Very large. I could probably fill one of our cubicles, kind of spatially, and maybe two in terms of length, depending on.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's.
So would you
maybe
say
like 15, 20 feet, maybe?
huge then, or gargantuan?
What's gargantuan? 20?
Yeah, 20
Yeah.
by
20?
20 by 20.
Not 20 by 20, but maybe huge.
Okay, so huge. All right,
Wow.
that's a good answer for a gamer to just say huge soap bubbles. All right. So there's another question. Has anyone tried to sneak something past you where you changed it and then they changed it back, and then you noticed that they changed it back during copy fitting?
No. I have not personally noticed that, I do not think. But sometimes what happens is the stuff that comes back in during copy fitting, for instance, we changed a thing in this text, and then for copy fitting, this much more text needed to be added, and then this text maybe still wasn't fully synced up with our edit. It was based off a dev. So that does happen.
I've definitely seen times that multiple editors have actually ping-ponged something a few times where I, as the designer, was trying to refer back to it, like, well, that changed again. And it seemed like that there were maybe just were two opinions on the editing team, but because of the way the process went, that it was more iterative and there wasn't a discussion.
And sometimes what happens is, say, the bestiary section of a document is in its third pass, but the NPCs are still in their first pass.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe not everything from the bestiary part has gotten fully sort of ported back into the new one. That can happen a lot, for instance. But the editors try to talk to each other a lot, because if you are developing a product, it's pretty much just you for the entire process of it. Or sometimes it gets split up. I know oftentimes we have maybe one person doing adventures and one person doing the back matter. But for editing, we are all on every product all the time. So we are constantly pinging each other about stuff, and we try to avoid fighting with each other about whether something is called this or that.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So here's a question that maybe isn't accurate to ask the editors, but who knows? Maybe they think that. I went to school with a lot of programmers who were all font snobs except me, so maybe they assume editors will be too. But the question is, the font used has differed between a few of the Paizo books I've checked. Is this something that changes between books, typically to fit the aesthetic of the book? That seems like more of an art question, but do you have any opinion?
It's more of an art question, but the answer is that everything except for maybe like the design font, like what's in the big display things, or what the font of the title is consistent across product lines. The stat block text for all Pathfinder products is the same text for the most part, or it will be going forward. By the time I joined Paizo, we were starting to move out of P1 and into the playtest, so I'm not sure, maybe 5 years ago, what it was like. But everything except for the large display fonts is the same across all the products, which is great. Although those display fonts are different for everything, and the first step of starting a new product line, especially like a big hardcover, is always opening it up and then seeing this giant list of things that's not installed on my computer, and then having to find the fonts from art to make sure that they work, and all that kind of thing. But as for like actually what the stat block is, it's the same font all the time, which is good. It it makes it consistent, and it helps you be more familiar with it, I think.
All right. So here's another question. Given the demanding schedule, will you get to play anything at Gen Con?
I highly doubt I'll get to play anything at Gen Con. Uh, we'll see. You know what our schedule is like.
Oh, I know. Hey,
But I might.
I wouldn't have asked that question, but chat did.
There
Um,
is. No, we
I don't think I'll
really
get
to
to.
play.
Yeah, we don't really get to play. I definitely want to walk through the Sagamore Ballroom at some point just to kind of see everybody playing, and the closest I get to playing might be me looking over somebody's character sheet and just being like, use magic missile. But I think, and I will definitely do that at least once.
Have they used magic missile when you suggested it in the past?
No, people like to not waste their spells on, barrels or trash mobs, which is inevitably what I tell people to waste their high-level spells on.
You heard it here, folks. James Case will give your characters bad advice about how to spend their spells.
That's right.
No.
Just look for him in the Sagamore if you need bad advice on how to spend your spells.
Why would I do that? We have so many months of knowing the system. We should be the most familiar with it. You can trust my advice.
Yeah. So here's one that may be more up your alley. What's your favorite Japanese artist this week?
Ooh, this week, the Hiatus released their first album in 3 years. It is very good. It is a lot more lighthearted than their previous one, which went super proggy, and it's all in all a good listen. I like it. New Hiatus album, it is called Our Secret Spot. You should listen to it.
All right. So here's one. Do the editors keep an in-world timeline to verify all dates that are published in world setting and adventure documents to make sure that they're accurate?
I think the developers have that timeline, and we have a link to that document. It's in a shared folder somewhere. The timeline does exist. We do have it. We keep our eyes out for egregious canon violations, but that really is the developers are the people who are best equipped to do that. They're the ones, outlining the stories, keeping all the characters straight, and that sort of thing. But we do have a reference, and if something seems way off, we do query it. Or sometimes we just ask Mark Marlin because it's faster. But
sure. Well,
or content.
He knows. Mark Merlin knows what's canon. Although he was, I guess, getting really happy with his not canon stamp today. He came over by my desk and stamped a printout of skeletons from the bestiary, not canon. And I don't know why. I think maybe he was testing it to make sure it looked right before putting it on some of the charity books that we were signing today. That's my best. That's my best theory. Either that or something about skeletons was just not canon.
What's there to not be canon about skeletons? They're skeletons. They rattle around and they throw bones at people.
There's
something.
a lot of them.
I don't know. So Night Trace is wondering a very important question: SoCal hardcore or ska?
Ska, but only in the summer and when driving to the beach.
All right. That seems specific enough that it will help people understand the context.
I'm from Hawaii. We go to the beach a lot.
All right. So they have another question. Current favorite movie?
I really don't get to the movies very much. I got out of the habit of doing it in Japan because the movies can come out as much as 4 months later than they do in America. So by the time we finally got something that everybody was really hyped about, it was 4 months later. It had all been spoiled. It was no longer in the cultural zeitgeist. And I was like, oh, I guess I'll watch it on a plane sometime, or that sort of thing. I think I most recently saw Spider-Man 5. This is the last time we get Tom Holland until we renegotiate his contract, which was fun. I did like that.
All right.
And then of course I do like Spider-Man 2, Too Many Spider-Men, which is Spider-Man. It's fantastic.
All right. So there's another question. Is a hot dog a sandwich?
Oh, no, I'm not going to get into this discussion. I will keep my sandwich alignment.
Oh, man. This was the one. All the questions people asked, they were like, is he going to answer this? Or
no,
is this going to be contentious?
This is an Apple of Discord question. I know better.
Okay. There you go. Well, we had Eris here in the chat, aka Night Trace. All right, Considering Warlock asks, what's your favorite thing in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, except you're not allowed to say the action?
System,
the three
because
actions.
everyone says the action system.
I'm not sure it's the action system, so that's convenient. I really like I like the way that we restructured ancestries a lot. I like that I don't have to have being a super awesome elf come at the expense of being a super awesome wizard. I like that they're in separate piles because then I can kind of be awesome at both and I don't have that secret feeling of like I should be a less good elf so I can be a better wizard.
Mm.
And I really like the way that I hate all dwarves have Scottish accents and love these things and know how to use axes and stuff
And
from
are
birth.
racist against those three types of things.
Yeah. And one of the things I really like we've done with ancestries now is the biological traits, the things that are really like part of their anatomy or physicality or their connection to the plane that they have because by dint of their race are all kind of in the heritage uh, or even just like the core ancestry ability silo, and then all the things that are cultural are things that you can pick because then sometimes I'm like, well, yeah, I'm an elf, but say I grew up on a barge that crashed on a desert island and I was surrounded only by I don't know, gnomes or something. Like why do I know how to use all these elven weapons? That doesn't make any sense. So uh, kind of splitting them up I think means that like we can change stuff around. My character in Return of the Rune Lords is a Tengu, so I start with Tengu as a common language, but I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. My character grew up in a, I don't know, not in a Tengu society. Why would he speak Tengu? So I just crossed out my character sheet, and I like that we can kind of play with that a little more now.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So, the next question.
I don't have clearance to spoil any of the player ancestries.
Okay.
So
The next question we're gonna answer though what is your favorite word?
What is my favorite word? Oh God. I've recently become awareness of the word overmorrow and ere yesterday, which are really old words for the day after tomorrow and the day before yesterday. And I like that we have them. They're just really old and nobody's used them in several hundred years. So those are really good. In Spanish, I really like the word zanahoria. It means carrot. I'm probably not pronouncing it correctly, but it is just a lot of vowels in a straight row. That's cool.
Yep. That is a good word.
In Japanese, I really like the word. It's a good one in Japanese. I really like hakanai. I really like it. Means like fleeting. It kind of has this element of bittersweetness to it. Mendokusai is also really good. It's just like it's a pain in the butt. Oh, otsukare is also really good. I say otsukare when I leave the office. It is just a thing you say at the end of a long workday or whenever somebody finishes doing a thing that was clearly a lot of work. And it's just like, I feel like if you say goodnight when you leave the office, it feels like you're tucking somebody into bed after reading them a bedtime story, which is weird. But if I leave the office and I say otsukare, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm leaving. We all worked really hard today. So.
And then you can just say otsukare back.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I remember learning Spanish growing up. A few of us memorized zanahoria as like it was la zanahoria because I think it was feminine. So it was lasagna Oreo.
Oh God, I don't remember
Like
how grammatical gender works. It's very complicated.
But it's a lasagna Oreo, which is apparently a carrot.
That sounds funny, but it also sounds very disgusting. So.
Okay. So to ask a version of Night Trace's question that is not obviously a question that we can't answer, bad Night Trace, boop. Do you have a favorite? I suppose it would be called race in first edition Pathfinder to play.
Favorite races in first edition Pathfinder.
And is it Tengu?
It is. I really like Tengu. I really do. Tengu is close. I do like that. I like Leshies a lot. They are. I think that Linda is by far established as Leshy Queen, so I'm not gonna even try to argue with her on that one.
The Leshy community is inclusive. You are as many Leshy fans as want to.
There are a lot of Leshy fans at Paizo. We talked to Arcane before about the fact that there was a giant meeting wherein like all except for the three most senior people at the meeting really wanted Leshies, and that is how Leshies got into character guide because they were like,
I remember Eric,
Yep.
Eric announcing it, and he's like, "We have what was it? It's like Hobgoblin, Lizard Folk, and God help us, Leshies."
Yep.
I do also. I don't know a ton about them, but I do really like the concept of samsarans. Also, just like the idea of like the whole like memory thing seems like it's really cool to play with. But I don't. I'm not hardly done like a lore deep dive on them or anything. I just think the concept is pretty cool.
Sounds good. All right, let's see. There is.
Do any of the Paizo peeps have a pet word they overuse so we can tease them?
Everybody has a pet word they overuse. Yes.
What's mine?
I don't. I hardly ever edit any of the OP scenarios, so I don't know.
What's mine?
I'm sure you have. I'm sure you have one though.
But you edit a lot of P2, so what's mine?
What is yours? You say with a lot. You always say with a trait. So you sometimes say they can do something. They can pick up a. Hang on. They can make an attack with a sword with the sweeping trait. You will always say with a trait instead of that has a trait.
Aha.
And even when that means that you are having, or sometimes if you say it like this, like you can attack somebody with an agile weapon, and sometimes it makes me think that you're picking up the trait agile and you're literally attacking somebody with the agile trait. So I change a lot of those to that has.
Aha.
Yeah.
I like with because it's not a dependent clause.
I am, as all the editors know, I am the #1 grammar heretic in the editing cube. They're like, this is passive voice. I'm like, passive voice is clearer. Do it. You know? I'm just like, language is about communication, and there is no central bureau of English correctness.
Yes, there is no central bureau of correctness to go to.
English isn't a book. It's a thing in our hearts.
See, I've tried to ask this question of editors before. I was like, what do I overuse and what do I do wrong? And they're like, you're fine. Don't worry about it. No, seriously. Tell me what I want to get
there are things like there's at least one person at the office who uses all caps and exclamation points a lot.
There are things that RPG writers as a whole use a lot, though. And some of them, I think, are just because they've been codified in the genre, and some of them are because RPG writing itself has a lot of, like, kind of unique challenges to it.
Oh, do you have Ryan Macklin's Editor Bingo? That had a lot of those.
I have seen a version. Is that the one that...
It has things like dominates the room and...
Yeah, I have seen that. I have it in a folder somewhere on my computer, but, like, an M dash when literally any other punctuation would be better. That's a big one. Anytime somebody starts writing about gnomes, I limit it to 1 whimsy per article. Whimsy is fine. You can use it 1 time per article. That is the maximum amount of whimsy.
I think I know one of the things I overuse, semicolons. I use those instead of M dashes. All the semicolons.
Problem usually goes the other way, but that's possible. But I mean, part of that is because in RPG writing, like, every proper noun is a made-up thing. So every time you use a proper noun, you have to explain what it is. You have to say, like, they went to Absalom, which is a city located, on the Isle of Kortos, which is this thing that Eridan brought up out of the thing, to go to take the Starstone, the artifact that fell from sky. And, like, if I were saying, like, yeah, after we go to Gen Con, I'm planning on going to London, which, as you know, is a city in England, which is a country located in Europe, a continent on the globe. We don't have to do that in English because we know what all the nouns are. So we don't have to do it in our conversation, but in RPG writing, you always have to, and I think that's why all of people get on the M dashes and parentheses and semicolons train.
All right, well, here's our next hot dog question. How do you feel about the Gunslinger in Pathfinder 1st Edition?
Man, Mark, why do you keep asking the hot dog questions?
How do I feel about the Gunslinger? I don't know. It has guns. Guns are cool. I love Alkenstar. I love the concept of Alkenstar. I have never played a Gunslinger or played with a Gunslinger. Oh, that's a lie. I did play a Gunslinger with my friend. He was very wahoo about it. He jumped off a bridge that was very, very high off the ground, and then, because he also had a bow and arrow, did the, I'm going to tie a rope, shoot the bow and arrow back, and have somebody catch it, and then he, like, the hostage was, like, falling. And he just caught it and went back, and we're like, you have, like, why did you do this? He's like, I thought it'd be cool, whatever. He's like, do I get grit now? And I was like, yeah, I guess you get grit.
I feel like if someone said they'd never played with a ninja, you'd be like, or have you, but you never saw the ninja. I guess the equivalent for gunslinger is like, I never played with a gunslinger. Or maybe you did, but by the time you showed up to the session, all of the enemies were dead.
I also really like the wizard gunslinger archetype crossover thing.
Oh, the spell slinger?
What's it called? That might be it. But I'm gonna be honest, like 90% of that is because the art's just really cool.
It did have a good piece of art. It has a lot of prohibited schools, although the thing that it does with the gun is pretty strong, but it has a lot of prohibited schools.
I'm a really big fan of spell punching and spell shooting. Like, I want to just put a spell on my fist and then punch somebody with it and then have the spell come out, and that's kind of what they do, but with a gun, so I'm super down.
Alright, so this next question they're going to have to help me with. It says, have you had to edit much of Thirsty's stuff? Do you such at him? That's what it says. I do not understand do you such at him, so just answer the first one, and maybe they'll fix the second one by the time you're done.
I actually edit very little organized play stuff. That we do all kind of move around as we have to, but for the most part, the people who hit OP really hard are not me.
Or anything that he's written as a freelancer?
So we don't know who the writers are most of the time. If the writers are editors, we log it down just because editing your own work is not the best. I try to avoid editing my own work, and we just put it in the schedule so we know that why is James not editing, this article? And the answer is because he wrote the article and he should not edit it.
Yeah. And in general, I don't feel comfortable talking about like what are these specific things that specific people do other than like for us.
Yeah, because everybody. I don't want to be bad mouthing anybody, and I also just don't know who they are. I don't get the outlines ready.
It's a mystery to everyone.
Yes.
It's good. It preserves the anonymity.
If you really know our freelancers, at least for me, I can just figure out who it was, even if they don't tell me. For some of the freelancers,
certain prolific freelancers who have certain style things, I can tell. I can tell without when I'm looking at text from other books. But generally, since I'm working on scenarios, it's pretty obvious who wrote the scenario.
Well, sure.